morning, and thanks for joining us here on Aspire to Retire with Ralph and Tim Short of Welcome Home Financial Partners. You can find out more about Ralph, Tim, the entire team at Welcome Home Financial Partners on the website, welcomehomefp.com. Also give a call, 804-635-3550. Just by listening, you're showing that you're taking your retirement prospects seriously. The next step, of course, is letting Ralph and Tim and the team at Welcome Home Financial Partners put together a customized retirement roadmap for you. Once again, that number, 804-635-3550. My name is Chris Swan, and I'm pleased to be joined, as always, by Ralph and Tim Short, the father-son team behind Welcome Home Financial Partners. Gentlemen, glad to be with you once again. How are you today?
Doing good, Chris. How are you?
Doing well, thank you. We have talked about this before. Longtime listeners will know you guys had a podcast for a while beforehand, and something we like to do. No, we don't like to do it. It just happens. It comes up. Is pick on the financial gurus, the people who are the talking heads that are on TV and things like. Bearing in mind, full awareness, you guys are on TV as well. It's a different situation. Well, I'm talking about people like Dave Ramsey and Susie Orman. Fair credit to them. They've helped a lot of Americans when it comes to erasing debt and becoming financially independent. It's fantastic. But financial author David McKnight calls their approach to income planning, which is a different beast altogether, more of a paint-by-numbers approach. He says much of the pair's advice is, quote, outdated and one size fits all. Now, I said right there at the beginning, customized retirement roadmap. That is what you guys do at Welcome Home Financial Partners. How is your approach to retirement income planning different?
Well, I think, you kind of said it right there at the last line is one size fits all. And, when you speak to the masses, if you're a talking head, if you're whatever, you're saying pretty much one or two different strategies for everybody. And let's be real. I mean, I had a conversation about that this week with a prospect, and they were asking a few questions. Said, well, what we're going to recommend to you is going to be completely different probably than the next person that comes in. It's never going to be the same because everybody's in a different position, everybody's in a different scenario, and we find that a lot of they'll go to like a big box firm or listening to people just say stuff out to the masses, and they said I need to do this or I need to do that or I need to do this. Well, do they know you? Do they know what you're trying to accomplish? Do you know what your retirement dreams are? And I think that's where people fall short of, hey, I'm listening to this person. I mean, in particular, there's one of those folks that continue to say, hey, zero debt all day, no debt, pay off your house, pay this off, pay that off. Is that really the right strategy? I mean, we used to be able to write off mortgage interest, and right now it's kind of hard to do that, but it's not always about that. And I think that's where, when you work with somebody who's local, when you work with somebody who's a fiduciary and they've got your best interests at heart, it's not going to be the one size fits all.
But I would say also, every person that comes in here is going to be completely different as far as what their goals and aspirations are. And the other thing is, not everybody needs that 2 million, 1 million, whatever it is, because they've done a good job of keeping their debt down. But how does that person that's on the radio show know anything about you if they're going to recommend you need to do this if they don't know anything about you? Because I can tell you there are people that will come in and they'll say they only spend $200 or $300 a month on groceries. I'm not really sure how you can do that, even if you got two people these days. But then we've got some people coming in here spending $2,000 a month on groceries. So how can somebody just say, oh, you don't need to spend more than $500 on groceries when they don't really know anything about you? They don't know what you're trying to do. They don't know anything about you. And that's the reason we do very personalized, get down to the brass tacks of what you're spending, how you're spending it. And if you've got grandkids, how much are you spending on that? You'd be surprised at the number of people when we ask them that question about gifts, they kind of look at you dumbfounded and say, never thought about that. And one of the other of the spouses will probably say, I can tell you it's a lot more than what I realized because I don't know everything they spend, particularly if you've got young grandkids. So that's the reason that we sit down with everybody and try and figure out what their income plan is, because most people don't have any plans. Most people just look at their 401k statements or IRA statements and say, hey, that's my plan. That's not a plan. That just shows you a statement how much money you got. It's not how you're going to take out and spend it. It's going to be, do you have enough money in the next 10 years to survive and do what things you want to do? How do you know that unless you go through what we call our roadmap process, which is basically cash flow analysis of income and expenses and taxes and put them all together.
It's one of those things that people don't think about. I think as they're going into retirement, tax is going to be different. How are they going to turn these retirement accounts into a retirement plan? It is vastly different. And, Tim, you mentioned there, one of the people that we mentioned a second ago, it is, of course, Dave Ramsey, is pretty steadfast in his, you need to be debt-free. Under no circumstances do you want to take out any debt. And there's something to be said for him having a consistent message, and we're not trying to beat up on him. I've certainly used some of his principles to, accelerate paying off, my car and things like that. But there are times and places, there are exceptions to rules. And you guys, because you educate your clients, you educate the listeners here on the show, if you present something to a client or a prospective client and say, this is what we recommend for you, and they decide, you know what, that's not necessarily going to be for me, or I don't necessarily agree with that for this reason or another. Is that the end of the conversation? Do you guys, is it my way or the highway, or are you guys willing to adapt and find what's going to work best for them at the end of the day?
Well, you always have to adapt. I mean, you can't just say, hey, this is it. This would be our recommendations, but that doesn't always mean that everybody's going to fall in line with it. And I think there are, different things for different people. There's comfortability factors, which I think, really kind of gets in people's way. But, specifically money in the bank. People, and we meet with people all the time that have several hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank. Is that the right strategy? Right. So I think that's where it comes into play of, hey, this is why we're recommending this. But of course, if we say, hey, instead of that $500,000 that you've got in the bank that's not working for you, and let's take out 3 or maybe 400,000 and let's make that work for you a little bit better. And they're like, oh, wait a minute. Like I like my 500,000 sitting there making less than 1%. I think that's where the comfortability comes in. So then we can tweak things. But even if we set up a plan, that doesn't mean that we can't tweak things along the way. I mean, hopefully we're living longer in retirement than we are while we're working, but we're supposed to be living longer. So maybe that's just a really good goal to have. But, if we're, in retirement years, 30, maybe 40 years, things are going to change. I mean, in 30 or 40 days, things are going to change. Right. So you've got to make sure, even if we recommend X, Y, and Z, that doesn't mean that later on down the line, it could be something different. So you got to make sure that your plan is flexible. And I think, they don't really look at everything as a whole. They're kind of more shifted towards, no debt and a few other things. But, have they thought about taxes? Have they thought about tax deferral? Have they thought about Roth conversions? There's a lot of things out there that could be a benefit to certain individuals, but other individuals, they wouldn't be very beneficial. So Roth conversions is one of those things that come up in almost every meeting at this point of, hey, I want to go ahead and convert this $1 million to a Roth. Oh, okay, well, do you know what that's going to look like? Well, no, I know I have to pay taxes. Okay, well, let's break down those numbers and let's see where the tax rates are. And then at that point in time, they're like, well, why does everybody say this is the best strategy out there? And it's like, well, because you're listening to people that are just broadcasting information out there and they don't know anything about you. So I think that's where people really have to focus in on, what they're trying to accomplish with their own money, because everybody's retirement is going to be different. So how do you align your assets, your investments, your income plan to make sure that you can do the things that you want? We can sit here and talk about different things, and this is just good information, but, there's a lot of folks that take a lot of information too seriously to a point to where specifically paying off your house. How many times have we heard the conversation or the question of, hey, I've got $1 million in my 401k. I owe $300,000 on my house. I know that that's the biggest expense that I've got in retirement right now. Should I just go ahead and take $300,000 out and pay off my mortgage? Well, you're not going to be able to pull out $300,000. You're going to have to pull out more, because if it's all pre-tax money, you're going to have to pull out way more than $300,000 to get there. On top of that, add that to your income for the year. So, we've seen that for the last 10, 15 years. That's one of the biggest questions.
And I would also say to the clients when they asked me that question, I said, let me ask you this, because we were always taught growing up not to have a mortgage in your retirement if you were lucky enough to retire by our parents. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just saying that's one of the things that we've been taught. But my question has always been, is having a mortgage in retirement the problem, or really not having the cash flow to pay that mortgage payment the real problem? And people will have to sit there and think for a minute and say, oh, never thought about it like that. It's kind of like, you were saying that Ramsey would say they won't change their opinion and stuff. Well, until just a few months ago, he was only saying you need to just take a 4% withdrawal of your retirement account and you'll be fine. Don't worry about it. And now he's talking to everybody about 8% withdrawal. So things change a little bit. I'm not sure how you can do the 8% rule,
Right.
but anyway, that's just some of the things that's coming out. And like Tim said, you just can't take everything at face value because it may not pertain to you. And that's where we come in and say, does this question that you asked really pertain to you? Or are you just regurgitating something that somebody told you and you don't really understand what they're saying? And that's where we come in as fiduciaries, people that you can say, I'm thinking about this. What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of have a discussion about it. You can't have a discussion with somebody unless you talk to them face to face, or you know who they are and what they're talking about. I don't think there's too many people that will call up Jim Cramer after they watch him on the news or a broadcast, or Dave Ramsey, and say, hey, this is what I'm thinking. What do you think? I don't believe they do that. That's what they can do for us here, because they can sit down. A number of times, Tim, you can probably verify this. A number of times people call them and say, well, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? Do I have enough money, or things like that? That's what it is to be a fiduciary, and let them understand what the client is trying to do so we can help them get where they want to go. Not where I want them to go, but where they want to go.
And one thing that we haven't talked about is the accountability factor too. Like,
Right.
I mean, yeah, I think you can call into Dave Ramsey's podcast or radio show, and maybe they'll field your call, and yes, maybe he'll answer your question. But us being here in the area, I mean, people can stop in. They can say, hey, what's going on today? This is what we're seeing. This is what we want to ask questions about. But if there's something that they specifically need or hold us accountable, we're here. And I think that's something that's kind of often overlooked of, certain people can blast things out, from different parts of the country. You're not necessarily going to go to their office or have that conversation with them. Whereas for us, we've got 3 offices. We've got the one in Ashland, the one in Chester, and the one in North Chesterfield. I mean, you can come find us. I mean, we're here. So I think it's important to make sure that you're able to be able to get a hold of that person that you're working with. And we've seen it quite a bit of, there's a lot of people who have called into maybe other radio shows or other commercials on TV, and they're not specifically talking to that individual who's on the television or on the radio show, and they've got their team approach, if you will, but you're never really going to get that face of that company. You're going to get the face of the company here.
I do say the team at Welcome Home Financial Partners, and I do mean it because you guys are a cohesive team. You can find out more about them if you go to the website, but it is a very, very small team, and you will meet Tim and you will meet Ralph, and I want to, what we said at the beginning, the Dave Ramseys of the world, they have certainly helped a lot of people, and fair credit to them. And perhaps you have used their advice. Perhaps you've taken their advice to heart and, use it to eliminate debt and things like that. That is fantastic. But when it comes to the income planning side of it, how you turn these retirement accounts into a retirement plan, you want something that is not more customized, that is very much customized for you to make sure that it works best for you. Because again, the national financial gurus, quote unquote, they're there to help or assist as many people as possible. But it's really just sort of a surface level sort of thing. It's kind of like if you're car shopping, you find the model of the car that you want, but the base model is probably not going to suit you. You want something more customized to you, and that's where you get down to the brass tacks. And that is what the team at Welcome Home Financial Partners can help you with. Create that customized retirement plan that takes into account income, that takes into account taxation, possible healthcare concerns down the line, longevity, the fact that, Tim, you mentioned people could be spending as much time in retirement, if not more, than they did in the working world. And how are they going to make that sustainable? Well, give a call, set up a time to speak with them, either in their offices, just that phone call to begin with. It's 804-635-3550, or the website, welcomehomefp.com. Perhaps being retired longer than people spend in the working world isn't for everybody out there. We've certainly heard of people, leaving their jobs due to burnout, but there's a psychologist out there who says that something new that is emerging is what he calls bore out, where workers are feeling underwhelmed, unchallenged, uninspired. And it's actually been more noticeable with the shift to remote and hybrid work. We've talked about that. It's coming up a lot lately. There's a new survey, though, that found that retirees, they can also suffer from bore out. It shows that of the seniors who recently unretired, more than a third of them did it just because they were bored. They had nothing to do at home. When retirees come to you guys seeking advice about an encore career, what do you tell them? Do you address the bore out factor before they retire? Do you talk about, you've got the income and you've got the means, but what are you going to do with the time?
I would say to most people that I speak to, I do have to warn them about there's two sides of retirement income planning or retirement life. One of them is financial, which we can definitely help you out with, let you visualize what your retirement is going to look like. But I think the other thing, and most surprising to people when I talk to them about this, is the emotional side. Guess what? If you're like most people, you're probably leaving to go to work between 6:30 and 7 o'clock. You might get home around 6 o'clock. So you really don't have too much time to go do social things other than just going to work. So most people's social interactions is going to be with your coworkers. You might go to church and stuff on a Sunday, but outside of that, that's more than likely for most people, that's kind of what they do. So guess what? When you're no longer at work, you're sitting at home, what happens? Some people get very depressed. I just had a recent gentleman that retired last year, and we had this discussion, and he came back this year for annual review, and we were talking, and he goes, hey, you know what? I can't stand this anymore. I cannot stand not being at home, not having a lot of things to do. I got some hobbies and stuff, but I love people. I'm a people person. I need to be around some people. So I'm going to go back to work and take a part-time job. Hey, there's nothing wrong with that. If you don't want to go back to work, that's fine. But if you do, hey, go for it. It's your life. It's not my life. It's not your neighbor's life. It's yours. Do what you want to do. Is that not what you planned on all these years of work, or 40 years of work, to go home and just sit at home and twiddle your thumbs? No. Go enjoy yourself. If that means going back to work so you can see people, hey, more power to you. Because guess what? It's your life. It's not mine.
Yeah, and I think it's funny because I had a gentleman come in a couple of weeks ago, and he's been with the company here in Richmond for 40 years this year. Actually, he gave me, I think it was 40 years, 1 month, and 6 days, I think is what he told me. And I was like, well, who's counting? But his wife works at another institution with the federal government, and she's thinking about retiring this year too. So we were starting the roadmap process, and I asked him, I said, well, when do you specifically want to retire? And he goes, I don't know. He goes, but I think my wife and I are going to retire at the same time. And I go, okay, interesting. And he goes, what? And I go, well, I can tell you that most of the clients that we work with, the spouses and them do not retire at the same time. And he kind of looked at me puzzled. And I go, think of it this way. I said, there's a whole lot of change that's going to happen when you retire, and retire alone, right? But imagine, because he was working 50 hours a week for how many ever years, and she's working quite a bit too. And it's like, okay, now you guys are going to be at the house looking at each other for an additional 10 hours a day, give or take. Now what? And he goes, oh my goodness. He goes, I don't know if that's the best strategy. So, he's kind of rethinking about when he's going to retire, because he knows he more than likely can. And that's what we're going to help him with, to kind of visualize what retirement is going to look like. But that's often overlooked, especially, let's take a look at a retail job. If you retire from a retail job, you're probably working weekends and nights and what have you. And, now if you're going to be, Sunday through Saturday at home with your spouse, it's a wake up call. And it's not that it's a bad thing. It's just a lot of change, and change is scary to a lot of people. So you've got to make sure that you understand that. But we see quite a bit of people over the last few years that, the first year of retirement or 2 years of retirement, that's enough for them. Now they kind of want to get back into the workforce, whether it's working part-time somewhere, just do something to stay busy. Maybe you're not a people person and you just want to stay active. There's a lot of people that don't want to get into hobbies such as fishing or golf or whatever, and they just want to go back to work and work, maybe 20 hours a week just to keep them busy. And there's nothing wrong with that. But you need to make sure that you can retire the way that you want. But if you want to go back for the social aspect or just to keep yourself busy, we're all machines. I say this all the time. Imagine riding up and down Interstate 95 in a car for 10 years. You're putting miles on that car. And then all of a sudden you take that car and you put it in the garage and you don't fire it up for 6 months. What's going to happen? That car's not going to run the way that it did. And that's kind of how we're built. And, if you're running, and now all of a sudden you're not, things might not be, your body might not react the way that you want it to. So everybody's got a different mindset when it comes to retirement, but a lot of people don't pay attention to, hey, my social interaction is going to go down, or maybe I do have to spend a little bit more time with my spouse or my kids or my grandkids. And sometimes that can be stressful enough as it is.
I would also say, when I talk to people, I said, it doesn't matter your age, stage of retirement, or whatever. You got to have a purpose for living. You got to have a mission. You got to have a purpose to get up out of the morning, just not sit around and do nothing. It's mission-driven retirement is what you need to do. Maybe you don't want to go back to work, but maybe you can focus on some type of mission, volunteer work for one of your favorite charities, or just go to the library and help them out, or volunteer maybe in your school system to help some of the kids be able to read better or do math better, which is something that I think people really need to focus on, is how are they going to help the next generation coming up, because we do need to help them to make sure we're in a stronger path down the road.
Maybe switching over to a mentorship position, whether that is at your current profession or another line of work. There was a gentleman that I worked with for in radio. He was a 35-year veteran. He spent a lot of time. He did very well, and he decided he wanted to retire. I remember him telling me, he said, "I think I'm gonna go ahead and retire, in the next 6 months." And his wife, who was not retired, she did work from home. She'd worked from home for a number of years. And in my brain, Tim, just like you said, I was like, okay, now you're going to have a dynamic where, you're not out of the house 8 or 9 hours a day. You're going to be there every single day. And I was like, okay, just, congratulations on a career well done. And hopefully we'll keep in touch. I think maybe 3 months after he retired, he called me and he said, "Hey, do you want to go grab lunch?" And we met up, and I said, how are things going? And he said, things are great. He's enjoying retirement time. I said, "What'd you want to meet up for?" He said, "Oh no, my wife just wanted me out of the house for a little bit. Just wanted me to get out because that was her space, that was her sanctum." We're not trying to deter you from retiring. Again, the name of the show is Aspire to Retire. I think we all do aspire to, in fact, retire for the most part. Some people may want to work as long as they possibly can, and that is fine as well. But we just want you to think about what you're retiring to. It doesn't have to be to a job. What are you going to do with that time? And that's not something that Ralph and Tim or the rest of the team at Welcome Home Financial Partners, they're not going to tell you what to do, because your idea of an ideal retirement is going to be different. What they are going to do is, that is a little bit of homework you might want to do. What am I going to do with that time? Is it travel more? Is it spend time with the grandkids? Is it take up a hobby? And of course, that could change as retirement goes on, in over the course of that 20, 30-year retirement. It certainly will change. Bring those conversations to the table, and then they'll build that plan, that customized retirement roadmap around that. And I say this so often, roadmap. My father, who was a engineer for the Army, and then he's thrice retired, actually. He went back as a civilian contractor and then worked at the church for a little bit. He's now officially fully retired, calls me 3 times a week asking if I want to grab lunch, because, again, I think the boredom thing might be there. But, as the plan can change, those roadmaps can change, because, you veer off course or you find a new destination you want to go to. That is where you get that, let's now craft the plan around that. It's a living, breathing thing that can change with you. So think about what you want to retire to, or what you aspire to do in retirement. Bring that conversation to the table. Let Ralph and Tim Short create that plan for you. It all begins with that conversation. 804-635-3550. Once again, 804-635-3550. Or go online to the website. Find out more about them. Set up a time there as well. That is welcomehomefp.com. As always, we appreciate you joining us, spending part of the day here on Aspire to Retire with Ralph and Tim Short. Hope you have a great week ahead of you. Hope you stay safe out there. Gentlemen, appreciate the time as always. And as we wrap up, I do want to leave you with the final word.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and we appreciate your time as well. But we've talked a lot about uncertainty and a whole lot of change going on, estate planning, Roth conversions. These things are very important and can be very important for your retirement plan. So, if anything you heard today kind of struck a nerve, if you will, give us a call. We'd love to see what kind of value we can provide for you. We bring you into the office and we can create your very own retirement roadmap. But pick up the phone, give us a call, visit the website, attend one of the First Friday events. We'd love the opportunity to meet with you. So we want to thank everybody for listening, and take care.
All content is for information purposes only. It is not intended to provide any tax or legal advice or provide the basis for any financial decision, nor is it intended to be a projection of current or future performance or indication or future results. Opinions expressed herein are solely those of Welcome Home Financial Partners and Welcome Home Wealth Advisors, LLC. The information contained in this material has been derived from sources believed to be reliable, but is not guaranteed as to accuracy and completeness, and does not purport to a complete analysis of the materials details discussed. All information and ideas should be discussed in detail with your individual advisor prior to the implementation. Each individual investor's situation is different, and any ideas provided may not be appropriate for your particular circumstance. Advisor services are offered by Welcome Home Wealth Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor in the state of Virginia. Being registered as an investment advisor does not imply a certain level of skill or training. Insurance products and services are offered through WPI Holding, Virginia Insurance License Number 138509, an affiliated company. The information contained herein should in no way be construed or interpreted as a solicitation to sell or offer to sell advisory services to any residents of any state other than the state of Virginia or where otherwise legally permitted. Welcome Home Wealth Advisors, LLC, and Welcome Home Financial Partners are not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any government agency.